Great, you're watching The Big Story. Thank you for staying with us. We're looking at the rivalry between the National Assembly and the Senate. Ordinarily, it would pass, but when you look at the implications, because now it's affecting the revenue allocation to 47 counties. It's affecting key services in the 47 counties, and that is a conversation we're having this evening. Our lead reporter, Duncan Haimba, just had a conversation with John Badi, who's the leader of a minority in the National Assembly. I'd like to bring in Kakai Kissinger, who's a constitutional lawyer. He's speaking to us on phone. Sir, good evening. Thank you for joining us on The Big Story. Talk to me about the sibling rivalry between the National Assembly and the Senate, the fact that they're now talking about getting this settled in court. It's not the first time we're witnessing the back and forth between the two houses. This doesn't look good, does it?
No, it does not look very good. And you need to ask ourselves, first of all, why do we have this new constitution, which is now almost 80 years old in terms of age? Then you notice that the new constitution has an elaborate chapter, which is actually chapter 8 of the constitution, which gives and lays down the basis of separation of powers between or within parliament, because parliament consists of the Senate and the National Assembly. And when you look clearly at Article 93, 94, all the way to 95, it spells down clearly what are the roles of each of them. The roles of the National Assembly are clearly captured under Article 95, while the roles of the Senate are clearly captured under 96. When you read these two roles of the National Assembly and the Senate, you do not see any conflict. It's very clearly and very well elaborated what the National Assembly is supposed to do and then what the Senate is supposed to do. So I do not understand where we are having a challenge between the two houses. Is it a fight of supremacy? Because you remember in the past we used to have issues of upper house and lower house. Is it an issue of supremacy? Is it an issue of ignorance? Or is it that the senators and the members of parliament, the National Assembly, are not clearly understanding what their roles are? So where I sit, and my understanding of the Constitution, there is no conflict whatsoever between the National Assembly and the Senate. What might be there is lack of understanding exactly what their roles are, or supremacy wars between themselves. But the law is very clear. This is Katiba that was passed by Kenyans. Kenyans debated this thing and agreed what exactly is the role supposed to be of each of them.
Okay, let me try and see if I can get where the problem is, because like you say, the Constitution is very clear on the role of Parliament and the role of Senate. So let's bring in Isaac Mwaura, nominated Senator. Sir, good evening. Thank you for speaking to us on The Big Story. I was speaking to Kakai Kissinger. He says, the roles of the Parliament, the roles of National Assembly and the Senate are very clear. So it's hard to understand where this conflict is coming from, sir.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm nakusikia Swahili kidogo, please.
Sorry?
Can you speak Swahili a little bit?
Okay, I'm struggling to hear what you're trying to say. Senator, can you hear me clearly?
My name is Peter.
Sorry?
My name is Peter.
Okay, Peter, I think I have called you. Someone may have mistakenly called you. I'm sorry. All right, so as we try to sort that out, let's try and see if we can still engage Kakai Kissinger. Kakai, so I was listening into John Badi, who's the leader of minority in the National Assembly. He says, the National Assembly thinks it's time to draw the line between the superiority war between the two houses. And but he says it's the Senate who started this whole war by taking them to court. As a matter of fact, the origin of all this is the revenue allocation. That was the turning point at which we knew that there's a problem between the National Assembly and the Senate. You've said the Constitution is very clear. But then anyone who's watched this back and forth would say the problem lies with the two speakers of the two houses, the National Assembly and the Senate, because the Constitution is also very clear that these two leaders are essentially supposed to sit down and agree what role falls within the Senate and which one falls within the Parliament.
Well, Linda, are you with me?
Yes, I'm with you, sir.
Very good. When you look at the role of the National Assembly, and you read Katiba very well, it clearly says that the National Assembly will deliberate and resolve issues concerning the people. That's the general objective of the role of the National Assembly. They also go ahead and do what we call enact legislation. Then they also determine the allocation of national revenue. They determine the allocation of national revenue. And the Constitution even says, when doing that, they must put in mind Chapter 12. And Chapter 12 talks about public finance and the Commission and the Revenue Commission. Then it also goes further and deals with the issues of how funds are supposed to be used by the national government, which of course includes the national government and other national state organs. It will also go ahead and tell you that it will exercise oversight over national revenue. So you clearly see that all issues concerning national revenue is actually the responsibility of the National Assembly. So
I slightly disagree, and maybe you can indulge me. Because the national revenue that you're talking about, that is supposed to be distributed across the 47 counties, will be used to implement some of the devolved functions that are now entrusted with the county government. So surely this is something that touches on the Senate's role. So where does that leave us?
The issue, when you should not read one article of the Constitution in isolation. You should read the articles of the Constitution based on what is the objective of the Constitution. Because if you read a single article of the Constitution in isolation, then you get actually completely confused. But when you read Article 95 clearly, and you read Article 96 clearly, it spells out specific functions of the National Assembly and, of course, the Senate. But remember one thing, Linda. What is supposed to happen between the National Assembly and the Senate is to complement each other. And you clearly say that the two speakers need to talk. So these are issues that were spelled out in the Constitution. There could be some few challenges here and there, and I'm glad to hear that this matter is going to go before a court of law. And of course, the court of law will deliberate this issue and give proper guidelines and time frames or manner in which the Constitution is supposed to be implemented. But my understanding is that there is no major conflict between the National Assembly and the Senate. What we need to be doing or understanding as Kenyans is we should stop the issue of supremacy war between the two houses. Because Kenyans wanted to have a constitution that actually addresses their needs and implements the objective, as opposed to having fights of who should do what and what. Yet the Constitution is very clear in terms of who is supposed to do what.
You know, when you say you're happy this is going to go to court, and I listened into Mbadi and we're talking about having an internal way to resolve this, because you're saying we don't need to see this rivalry, but then you have the National Assembly saying, I mean, this is not the first time the Senate is taking us to court. From where you sit, do you want it to go to the courts, or do you want an internal resolution to all this? Like we did mention, the two speakers of the both houses can actually sit and resolve this, can they?
You know, we have three arms of government, the executive, the judiciary, and of course the legislature. If there's any conflict between government...
Kakai, someone is making noise close to you. Can you move away, please?
I'm saying there are three arms of government, the executive, the legislature, and of course the judiciary.
Yes.
If there's any conflict in government, you can never leave this conflict to politicians, because they cannot solve anything, they cannot arbitrate anything, despite the fact that we have mechanisms of them dealing with it. So the best option for us to have a proper way forward is where it's going. Let it go before a court of law. It will be seized by judges who are part of the judiciary. They will decide then which is the best way to do, because at the end of the day, judges are the ones who are actually supposed to interpret the law, what the law says. So I think for me, it's a good thing that we have an independent institution in terms of our judiciary. It's a good thing that is being litigated before a court of law, and then directions will come out of it. And that's what democracy is all about.
That democracy you're talking about, Kakai, may present a problem, because the National Assembly is coming up with some suggestions on how to approach this particular issue, and they're coming up with suggestions to do with the Senate. And just stay on the line, Kakai, with me. I'd like to bring in Samson Cherargei, the Nandi senator. Sir, thank you for joining us on The Big Story. I was having a conversation with Kakai Kissinger, who's a constitutional lawyer, and he says, I mean, let this thing go to court. Let the courts decide which way this is going to go. But then, Senator, I know that there's a conversation about scrapping the position of leader of the minority and majority in the Senate. There are those who say this is some sort of a get back from the National Assembly to the Senate. Where do you stand in all this?
No, good evening, Linda.
Good evening.
Thank you for having me tonight. I think those are wishy-washy and do not hold water. When you look under Article 93 of the Constitution, the definition of Parliament has been made to mean the National Assembly and the Senate. So, in any case, when they say they want to scrap the leader of majority or leader of minority or House leadership in the Senate, it is not here nor there. And I think they are just trying to intimidate us because we are in the process, and my committee is looking at many issues to move to court, and we are finalizing our move to court to challenge some of those bills, which are around 17 of them, and therefore they are just bringing this as diversionary tactics to divert Kenyans from the real issue. And I think as a country, yes.
Go on. As a country?
As a country, it is good. We want, when you go to, even now the Senate of America started, they had to go through the challenges. If as a country, with any jurisdiction that has a bicameral parliament, we should have a house which has the veto and the upper house. But we don't mind that one. But the problem is we are challenging based on the advisory opinion of 2013, where under Article 110, sub-Article 3 of the Constitution, that the National Assembly, they should be concurrent between the National Assembly and the Senate on the bills that are being considered before the House. And therefore, what is important is that we want the courts to pronounce themselves, because so that we avoid. You can imagine in the last Parliament, in the 11th Parliament, more than 40 acts of Parliament were passed by the National Assembly alone. In this Parliament, of the 12th Parliament, more than 17 have been passed and have been assented by the President without the concurrence from the Senate. So, Linda, why we are moving to court is to seek a proper interpretation of the court, where we will even get a concurrent certificate being produced during by both the Speaker of the National Assembly and the Speaker of the Senate. We want these things, the courts, to pronounce themselves, so that now the National Assembly choose and pick when to refer any bill to the Senate. And they have been using, finally, Linda, they have been using a very strategic argument that it is this one is money bill, so that the Senate does not have a say. That is why we are threatening. And this is not a threat. I'm just saying we are even in future. We might even call upon counties not to obey any national legislation that has been considered by National Assembly alone, because counties exist in Kenya, and if they are saying it does not concern counties, why pass a law and then counties to obey that law, yet the protectors of devolution have not been involved?
Okay, this just complicates the whole thing. So you're insisting you guys are going to go to court. But then, hold on, Senator. The Constitution is very clear about the role of Senate and the role of the National Assembly. You're saying laws have been passed without concurrence. Is there an internal way to resolve this without necessarily going to court? This is why I am worried, because this push and pull back and forth is going to affect even the revenue allocation that is now holding all the 47 counties at ransom.
I think when you look at the Constitution, Linda, it's very clear that when there is failure by both houses to agree, there is the formation of mediation committee, and has been provided by the standing orders of both houses, where you choose equal number of members to go and agree. And in fact, as we discussed, it is not only the division of revenue bill that has collapsed. Even the Kenya Roads bill collapsed. There are so many bills that collapsed at the mediation level, and if it collapsed constitutionally and legally, it means that that law can only be reduced by republishing. And for example, let me use division of revenue bill the mediation that collapsed. What we were just requesting, we had wanted through consultation of Commission of Revenue Allocation, we had wanted counties to get 335 billion. The National Assembly decided to cut down even below the baseline to come at 310 billion. Yet the last financial year was 314 billion. But when we negotiated, they insisted on adding only 2 billion to become around 316 billion. But we are saying you have 3 trillion budget here. Why can counties get 327 billion? But they decided that counties do not need the money. The argument is very weak. Why should we give counties money and money is being lost? So at the end of the day, there are internal mechanisms that the Constitution has provided that if the houses fail to agree, they go to mediation. And if mediation collapses, then that is the end of that bill and sell, and unless it is being reintroduced by the public. And I've seen efforts that are being made through the IPA consultation of council, governors, the Senate, the National Assembly, to try and resolve the stalemate on the issue of division of revenue bill. So even, Linda, as I conclude, when you look at the article, is it article 120, 121? When you look even on the formation on how budget estimates are presented at article 121 by the Ministry of Treasury on budget policy statements, the law, when you look at the Public Finance Management Act, it is very clear that the Senate and other stakeholders must be consulted even before those budget estimates are being taken to the National Assembly for consideration. And therefore, we are wondering, why should the National Assembly insist on the division of revenue or shareable revenue? And even you add the court, there is another complicated issue where the Court of Appeal has said we can't oversight own source revenue. So we need the courts to pronounce themselves so that these matters can be put to rest.
Okay. This rivalry. This rivalry.
What I'm saying, Linda,
yeah.
What I'm saying is that if the internal mechanism of the mediation can be done, which is okay, the mediation collapse. But what we are saying, we want the courts to pronounce themselves so that they can tell us what role does the Senate play when you say, for example, Linda, let me use the example of Huduma number. The other day they told us Huduma number does not concern counties. Yet the people who are saying Huduma number live in counties. So at the end of the day, we might even consider as Senate telling counties not to obey any laws that have been assented when they are not being concurrent by the Senate because they are saying it only involves. You remember, Linda, as I conclude, the security laws. The security laws, the courts pronounce themselves that the Senate must be involved even in the discussion of the security laws.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, I want to ask my colleagues, if diplomacy fails, now that is the resolution, because starting this diversionary tactics of saying we want to challenge how the leadership of the Senate is constituted is not here nor there. They should look at Article 93 or the definition of the Parliament. They should the intention of the design and architecture of the Constitution. So I would urge my colleagues: 1, let them give money to counties. 2, let us allow Senate be, and that is how we'll proceed as a country.
All right, I hear you, Senator. I hear you. Kakai Kissinger, do I still have you on the line? Kakai Kissinger, do I still have you on the line? Senators, both of them. Kakai, do I still have you on the line?
Yes, I'm online.
Were you able to listen into what Cherargei had to say?
No, it was a blank from my side. I couldn't hear anything what you were saying.
Okay. So in a nutshell, he says this essentially diplomacy has failed. They're going to go to court to get a clear guideline. He seems to agree with you, actually, that they're going to go to court and get a clear guideline on the roles of the two houses.
And that's what I was exactly telling you. You can never leave anything to politicians to decide for Kenyans. Never. That's why you can't remove some powers from the judiciary. You can't remove some powers from the judges. That's why we have courts in this country. If you leave politicians to decide anything, it will be decided, it will be short-term, but you need a permanent solution to the problem. And the permanent solution can only come from our courts that are independent.
Okay, so basically, your final thoughts, Kai Kissinger, on the way forward for this? They go to court, they get a final proclamation, and that's it?
My final thoughts is that both the Senate and the National Assembly must understand in crystal clear their terms and roles as spelled out in the Constitution. And number 2, they must enhance synergy and complementarity between the two houses in order to effectively implement what the Constitution expects them to do. Failure to comply with what I've said 1 and 2 above, then the courts or the judiciary should be seized of the matter, give directions to the way forward. And that will be a lasting solution.
Yeah, that would be a lasting solution. But finally, before I let you go, constitutionally and legally, why is it important to get these two houses to finally work together? Why is it in a bad place for the country for the two houses to keep fighting each other?
One, the spirit of the Constitution is to ensure that the objectives of the Constitution are achieved. And by achieving the objectives of the Constitution is to ensure that the Senate and Parliament work together in order to achieve what the Constitution wants to achieve. So if they do not work together, then basically they are circumventing what the Constitution intends them to do. They have then got no business to either be sitting in Senate or they have got no business to be in Parliament. Remember, this is our Njiku Constitution. This is a Kenyan Constitution. This is the people's Constitution. What people want is not the infight between the Senate and the National Assembly. What people want, objective of the Constitution and service delivery. And that's why they have a contract with Kenyans for 5 years.
Okay, so I hear you that the only way that we can get to solve this is for the two houses to finally head to court and have a conversation about where exactly their roles are drawn. So let me just run you via some of what the National Assembly was saying with relation to scrapping the leaders of the Senate. And that is why Cherargei was saying, I mean, this is wish-wash, this is not going to go anywhere. So National Assembly says, whereas Article 108 of the Constitution establishes the office of a leader of majority party and a leader of minority party being the person who is the leader in the National Assembly of the largest party or coalition of parties and the person who is the leader in the National Assembly of the second largest party of coalition parties. And whereas the said Article 108, subsection 4 of the Constitution exclusively accords certain order of precedence to be observed in the National Assembly, being the Speaker of the National Assembly, Speaker of the National Assembly, the leader of the majority party, and the leader of the minority party. Hence the one in the Senate is unknown to the Constitution and any law. So basically they're saying the majority leader, minority leader in the Senate is a position that is unknown in the Constitution. They don't recognize it. So basically talk saying that they need to scrap the leaders, those two positions, leader of minority, leader of majority in the Senate. Let's see how this plays out, that sibling rivalry between the National Assembly and the Senate. It's a conversation that will pick up tomorrow, because you do realize the revenue allocation bill is yet to go through. There's a conversation between governors and Deputy President William Ruto. They gave the deadline of tomorrow. So let's see how that plays out. That's it for us here on The Big Story. I am Linda Ogutu. A big thank you to all our guests we've spoken to on phone, and John Mbadi as well, leader of minority in the National Assembly. Good evening.